Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that'll determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you the views that are expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views. And for the next hour, they're going to be those of Pastor Doug Riggs. And we're going to be talking about the dark side. There really are dark and sinister spiritual forces out there that are not imaginary. They're real. We hear a lot of talk about the supernatural, and a lot of people are intrigued by it. And there is a supernatural. There is another dimension out there. There are beings that can, of course, come back and forth, the demonic beings, and I'm sure there are angels as well, that look after those of us who have given our lives to the Lord. But there are demonic beings out there that would counter the influence and everything that's good and worthwhile in the world today. Well, Pastor Doug Riggs has been studying a lot of these things for many years, is actively engaged in this. And so, without further ado, Doug, thanks very much for being with us tonight.
It's my privilege, and it's great to be on your program, Dr. Stan.
Why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, about your ministry, and, of course, what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, back in the mid-'70s, just studying the Word, especially the book of Ephesians, began to see a number of what is called indefinite temporal clauses, like the church is to come to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, the fullness of the Gentiles is to come into the body of Christ, and there's just a number of contingencies, and I began to ask the Lord, Stan, what do you need in order to see this age consummated? And what is standing in the way? And I have one life, and I'd like to give my life to you, Lord, to see, my part, to see this age consummated, so Jesus Christ would not have to wait and be able to return. Well, I had no idea what I was asking, because there are plenty of things from the enemy's standpoint that have been in place for centuries to thwart the coming of the Lord, to thwart God's purpose for the church, and to thwart the fullness of the Gentiles coming in the body of Christ. And so after I finished seminary, I began to pastor a little Bible church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there were gathered to me people who had hearts for God, but also had a history, had a hidden occult history through trauma-based mind control. Not all at the same level. Some were higher level than others. And as that began to unravel in the mid-'80s, I discovered the phenomenon that was then known as multiple personality disorder. That was carefully structured and put in place by Nazi-type doctors who were working for members of the royal family to carry out their agenda to bring in their Christ. And so my goal has been to see people be set free and come to maturity, but in the process, these carefully laid plans of the enemy have created these strongholds that has been an extremely great challenge to see undone.
Well, of course, most people find it very difficult to believe that there really are these people with these dissociative personalities. That's what they call it today, but it's a split personality, and it's actually produced by trauma-based mind control.
Yes.
And, of course, terrible, terrible things. A lot of this is satanic ritual abuse. And, of course, this came to be understood in the late 80s and early 90s. And then, of course, the CIA comes up with their false memory syndrome organization all across America, planned a program, of course, to convince us there is no such thing as false, as satanic ritual abuse. And that really, of course, this is all a false memory. They invested a great deal of time and effort into that for a very specific purpose, because they didn't want the public to know that about the other dimension and about the satanic forces in America today. Will you go ahead and pick up the story there?
Yes, I think when it comes to the CIA, the MK Ultra program that was started back in the early 50s, which was an umbrella with 149 sub-projects. As they were carrying out their experimentation, and we know Dr. Ewan Cameron in Montreal was doing his depatterning, and he was financed by the CIA. There were a number that sued the CIA, and of course they settled that out of court. And so it would behoove those that were working in that particular area to be on the board of the false memory syndrome, because this is costing them money to have to pay out to those people who have been experimented on.
In fact, the story of Dr. Cameron is really one of the most bizarre sorts of stories of all time. And the fact that most people have never heard of it simply reflects the control that exists over the media in America today.
Yes, that's correct. I think the whole, 1 John 5:19 says the whole world, the whole satanic cosmos lies in the power of the evil one. And that certainly doesn't exclude the media, does it, Dr. Scanlon?
It certainly doesn't. Well, anyway, so what happened as far as your effort? I mean, people are being brought to you or coming to you because they have the dissociative personalities, and of course nobody believes them. I mean, the whole story is just so bizarre. How could such things be going on in America today and nobody know about it?
Well, that's the whole point. When Nazi Germany was defeated in World War II, the SS got together in various different ways, and they planned to carry on the Third Reich, only it was to be ultimately the Fourth Reich, and it would be brought about through occult means, and it wouldn't come through Germany. It would be a worldwide phenomenon. And the things that they learned, the techniques they learned through the work of Dr. Mengele at Auschwitz, the trauma-based mind control, the twinning, they took this technology, and some of these doctors were brought to the country, to the United States, and sheltered under Operation Paperclip. And the CIA got a hold of them, and they used them to create their own operatives so that they would be an operative and not even know they're an operative. And I think for the listening audience, to understand this is to understand the nature of trauma. If you look at the Iraqi soldiers that are coming back today who are suffering, over 10% are suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, this is because of trauma they're experiencing in battle. But if you take that kind of trauma and much worse and subject a little child to that from the earliest childhood, their identity fragments. And through chronic trauma, that the... Hold
that thought right there. We'll be back in just a moment, Doug. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Pastor Doug is talking about this whole idea of taking a child and submitting them to terrible psychological trauma. And, of course, this is how you create a dissociative personality. And people say, why, who in their right mind would want to harm a child? And if this sort of thing was going on, everybody would know about it, be up in arms. And no, the truth of the matter is, the reason you don't know about it is because the media is controlled, and there really are people not in their right mind, but of course they have a different worldview, that actually have these programs. In fact, there was a television program many years ago. It was called The Pretender. And it was the story of a little boy who had been taken, by the government and submitted to all sorts of horrible things. But of course, you can actually alter the child's personality so they'll have a photographic memory. They will have very, very special talents and capabilities as part of their dissociative personality. And that was the television story. The trouble is, as preposterous as it was, the story of The Pretender was really based upon what's going on in America and throughout the world today. And in fact, because you saw it on television, you know it's all make-believe, but the tragedy isn't make-believe, is it, Pastor Doug?
No, in fact, there's a therapist that I was in touch with that knew the screenwriter for the screenwrite person that wrote the script for Conspiracy with forgot his name.
You're talking about Mel Gibson?
Yeah, Mel Gibson,
right.
Conspiracy Theory, whatever the title was. But the part of the screenwrite in that, the therapist that I talked with, her first name is Pam. She knew the person, and that whole background was actually based on truth. And so they put this up on the media so that if people come forward and begin to talk about these kinds of things, they just, they've already got their bases covered. You've been watching too many movies, etc., and so therefore it's easy to explain it away.
Well, it is real. In fact, we've had several people here in our area. One woman is a victim of satanic child abuse, came from a satanic family. Another, suddenly, I'm not sure how she underwent this, but finally she got her mind straightened out because of a therapist here in Santa Cruz. But the therapist really is almost afraid to come on the radio and talk about these things publicly because they sound so strange. And yet, of course, she's seen a number of these cases. They are real. Certainly Dr. Colin Ross down in Texas, and we carry his book. It used to be Operation Bluebird. That was the name of the government project. Now the book is called The CIA Doctors. But it's so important that people, get that information and read it and understand what is really going on. We have interviews with Colin Ross in our 4-tape set on Operation Paperclip. But go right ahead, Doug. So anyway, Sonny, how did you learn how to handle these and how to help these people? Because, of course, they're desperate for help. They go to the average psychiatrist, the average doctor. They have no idea what's going on. They find it preposterous to believe this could actually have happened.
Well, I'm delighted that you're going to have Russ Dizdar on your program. As we've talked and as I've read through some of his material, Russ and I were at a seminar back in the early 90s, the first annual conference on ritual abuse and mind control, and we met a number of top-level people, Alan Shefflin and Dr. Corey Hammond, they were secular people who were trying to help therapists to understand what they were dealing with, because the psychiatric and the professional people were told that this was a very rare disorder, the multiple personality disorder, and really it's as common as trauma and dysfunctional families are in existence in our family structure today. And if you have any kind of abuse, it doesn't have to be ritual abuse, chronic abuse, verbal abuse, a child can split and create alternate personalities. But when the level that I'm talking about, and the reason I mentioned this particular conference that Russ Dizdar was attended along with myself back in the early 90s, I met a man by the name of Daniel Ryder, and he was in our church back in the 90s. And on one of his books, he wrote one titled "Breaking the Circle of Ritual Abuse." But I think the last book he wrote is called "Cover Up of the Century: Satanic Ritual Crime and World Conspiracy." It's a very rare book, but people can order it through the interlibrary loan at their public library. But in the last chapter, Daniel wrote on this. It's this particular aspect of world conspiracy, and he quotes an individual and he gives a pseudonym to it. And he says that this particular individual, whom he calls John Smith for safety reasons, he too said that some of these cult survivors that he had been working with have been turned into conditioned operatives to be used as, in essence, dissociative pawns for drug dealing, prostitution, weapons sales, assassinations. He used the metaphor of an army of worker ants who are being controlled by megalomaniacs who ultimately want total power and world dominion. Many cult survivors and others in diverse research areas around the world have independently stated that the international leadership of the cult is called the Illuminati. Now, when we say Illuminati, we think that goes back to Adam Weishaupt. Actually, that was just bringing it back to the surface. The illuminated ones goes all the way back to the old Babylonian Empire and the secret societies and that which was the cult of the mother goddess and all that which we find in world religions. It has its source back in the old Babylonian Empire. So this was just a resurgence under Weishaupt, and it has moved forward currently in the present, and it is a dominating power. But we have to understand this is not a cabal of just men. We know Psalm 2, especially if you read it in the Hebrew, that it's the Gentile nations. It's not a Jewish conspiracy. It's the nations come together as a tumultuous throng, as a one spirit and one mind against the Lord in our Christ. So it is there. But Satan is the ultimate conspirator against God and the people of God and mankind. We have to understand that he is the prince of the power of the air and that men are just agents through whom he works.
Well, I think that people really have to understand that going all the way back to Babylon, there have always been so-called the mysteries or the mystery religions or secret societies. But of course, the bulwark of the secret societies was the mysteries that were passed down, the secret that has been passed down for 5,000 years. And there have always been secret societies. They existed all throughout the Middle East, and then they were tied into the Assassins. They were tied into the into the Knights Templars. They were tied into the Rosicrucians. They were tied into the people who wrote the Kabbalah, which was nothing more than the codification of the ancient knowledge of the ancient mystery religions, carried forward into Christian Gnosticism, forward into the Illuminati, then into modern day Masonry, and now into so many of the other covert organizations working together. And of course, there is a power out there you can tap into, but certainly you don't want to, because it is organized evil and it'll cost you your eternal soul. A lot of people have tapped into it and had great wealth and great fame. And they've made great discoveries, like Thomas Edison. He was deeply involved in the occult. All the wonderful things that he gave us were the byproduct, of course, tapping into the other side, but the average individual doesn't understand that. Although if you read Edison's autobiography, he will tell you about going into these altered states of consciousness and meeting these other beings.
Yes.
So you go right ahead.
Well, I'm thinking of the various levels. You're going to have Russ on, and I'm sure you're going to talk about the Black Awakening. When I look at biblical eschatology, I see things maybe a little bit different in that the final stage of the church age before the rapture, the church is going to pass through, I don't believe the Great Tribulation, but the church, since judgment begins with the household of God, the church is going to have to pass through some real cleansing and challenging times so that the bride will be without spot or wrinkle. And I think 1 Peter 2:12 refers that to the day of visitation. Russ will refer to that as the Black Awakening. What our listening audience needs to be aware of is that there is a clandestine plan to bring down the United States and any established order to establish a new world order under Antichrist. This has been in the planning for many, many years. Those that are the oligarchy of plutocrats, the elites, Lucifer is their god. They don't refer to him as Satan, and they walk with him closely, and they have a walking relationship with him, and they're rewarded greatly for their obedience to him. Their goal is to bring this world under a king who has a right to reign. This king has to have the right bloodline. They believe that this can be traced back to the Merovingian and that kind of thing. But they have the right to rule, and when that king comes on the scene through right bloodlines and the bringing together of the right combination of bloodlines, then he will rule the world. And that's what they're working for, and they believe that this is the hour and the opportunity that they can bring this plan to pass. Now, in your study that there's all kinds of ways in which this is happening. In the work that I'm doing, Dr. Stan, and of course Russ will be able to talk about this as well, is that how is this being brought to pass? In the most hidden way, these various agents and operatives are at all various levels and strata of our infrastructure and our social structure, and at the right time, they are ready to fulfill the plan to bring about this particular new world order. And, for me as a believer in Jesus Christ and as a pastor, I understand that God has a plan for the church in the end times. And that's what I'm excited about, Stan, is because those that know their God are going to come forth, and they are going to shine in such a way that God will have a counter move to the final move of Satan, leading up to the final emergence of Antichrist.
Well, I think anybody who would like to check out what Doug is saying, you can go up on the Internet and type in Share International, The Emergence, or Maitreya, or certainly just a week ago today in the money market division on the Internet of the Wall Street Journal, they announced that the new world leader would be coming sometime next year, or at least very, very soon. Sounds incredible. We got the article off of Constance Cumbie's website. She'll be with us Tuesday evening. They're planning, and there really is another group out there, planning on bringing back this world leader very, very soon. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and of course the significant thing is that we're moving into a period of chaos and crisis, and most people, of course, look at what's going on from an economic point of view, or even from a political point of view, but they very, very seldom look upon it from a spiritual point of view. And yet, of course, so much of what's going on, if you look at it logically, really doesn't make sense unless you understand there are powerful spiritual forces at work, moving America, moving the world towards the establishment of a one-world government with a one-world religion, with a one-world ruler. And he is sitting there waiting to come forward, as they call it, the emergence. Go right ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was just thinking, people say, well, where do you find, conspiracy theory? I sent you a little thing, an email. There's no such thing as conspiracy theory. The Bible presents only conspiracy fact. And starting with Psalm 2 and many other Psalms, like Psalm 37, the wicked plot against the righteous. There was a conspiracy in the Sanhedrin to crucify Jesus Christ. There was a conspiracy of 40 to kill Paul. I mean, they gather at the end of the millennial reign of Christ to wipe out the saints in Jerusalem. So Satan is the head of this, and men are the instruments. But I think, getting back to the spiritual side of it, when you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says the mystery of iniquity is already at work, and it's a present tense. And the word mystery in the Greek, mysterion, means in the Greek mysteries, you could translate it this way: the sacred secret. And it's also used of the mystery of Christ, and Paul uses it, in describing the mystery of Christ in the church. But it's a sacred secret. And if anyone has access to Kittle's Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, and I think it's in volume 5, if you go through and read those 20 pages under mysterion, it is a real eye-opener, because it gives you the secular usage and how it is used in secular history. And in that particular section of mysterion, you see everything that is going on in the occult today. It has not changed. It was in operation in Paul's day, and of course, as we already mentioned, went all the way back to ancient Babylon.
Well, the average Christian, of course, when they read the Bible, they hear about, of course, Paul coming in contact with this woman who was basically a fortune teller, had supernatural power. But we really don't project that forward to what's going on today, the fact that there really are people out there who do have supernatural power. There are people who are mediums, and they really do have contact with the other dimension. There are people who are fortune tellers and diviners and people deeply involved in spiritualism, and these are very sincere people. But they're in contact with the other dimension. I had a fellow the other day. I wanted to try to get hold of his wife, and he asked if I'd like to have him on, and he told me that he can actually pass his hands over people and know what's wrong with them and make a diagnosis and tell people what to do, and they are cured. Mm-hmm. And I think he's probably really very sincere, and I think it probably can happen. This is what Edgar Cayce could do. But, of course, Edgar Cayce was in contact with the demonic spirits, and we've talked to other people into this sort of thing. And those who've recognized what it was really have, of course, abandoned it, have renounced this ability to do supernatural healing because, of course, they're tying into the dark side. Yeah. And yet you tell this to the average individual, and their eyes glaze over. It couldn't be true.
Well, I think if people want to look at that particular level, which is quite a bit less than what I've been aware of, but you read Johanna Michelson's book, The Beautiful Side of Evil, she describes all of that kind of practice.
Hold that thought in just a moment. We'll be right back here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we were just talking about the supernatural, the ability of some people to do supernatural healings. And, of course, Doug was saying that, of course, if you read Joanna Michelson's book, The Beautiful Side of Evil, you will realize that there really is a supernatural power that can cure you, but this power, at least in the material that Joanna was working with, was not coming from God. It was coming from demonic forces. So pick the story up there.
Well, I just mentioned that as someone who was dabbling in the occult powers. I think when it comes to that which is really at the higher levels of bringing in the New World Order, this is a whole different ballgame. even the CIA operatives that I've worked with, in terms of the internal DID structure, that is the dissociative layering of the alternate personalities, this was more in the outer layer of the internal DID structure, and it was all designed to shield the deeper bloodlines. In working with this through the years, some of the deepest hidden areas are those people who are coming out of the royal families of Europe. And when you get down to this level of the identity, there's a heavy layering of generational ancestral principalities, and these entities are very different from the demonic realm. They don't go looking for pigs, to go enter when they're cast out. They are very different. They have their own light bodies, and these entities are the world rulers of this present darkness that Paul talked about in Ephesians chapter 6. He mentions the heavenlies 5 times in Ephesians, and Professor Harris mentioned that epuranois, where we have the usage of heavenlies in the book of Ephesians, could also be translated as heavenly spheres or spiritual dimensions. And so these dimensions actually exist, and they're beyond our ability to sense with our 5 senses, but they are more real, and they govern the reality of which our 5 senses experience every day. It is what's going on in the invisible realm that is the supernatural that governs all visible phenomenon. And God, of course, infinitely transcends evil. And if we're walking with God and in fellowship with Him, His plan in these last days, Dr. Stan, is very exciting, because what He has provided for believers is going to be greater than the best that Satan has done to thwart His plan in these last days.
You mentioned, of course, the relationship to the royal families of Europe. They were often referred to as the black nobility, but are you suggesting that these people are related to the families, or that so much of this evil is being promoted by the royal families of Europe?
Well, no, not all the people I worked with, but there are some that are direct descendants, and privately I can tell you specific instances, but I shouldn't do that on the air.
All right, fine. No, there's certain things you probably shouldn't. In fact, it's so interesting, because I was talking with a woman who was certainly related to the royal family of Spain, who was actually certainly has this really psychic ability to communicate with these demonic forces.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, the British royal family, the House of Windsor, they're all very much involved. I will say that. I think that, we know that Prince Philip is really Germanic, and he's been reported by numerous people of being a very influential position of one of the kings of the earth that we see mentioned in the Bible in terms of an occult position. It's these people that are the inner circle of the royal family that they're vying to have a son who has the right to rule and reign as the Christ. So you have the Romanovs in Russia vying for their person to come to power. You have the 10-toed kingdom of the revived Roman Empire, and you have those European royalty vying to have a son to come forth, a scion to rule and reign. So we have spheres of competition going on, and these people purposely sire children and then hire people that were mentored by Dr. Mengele to create splitting in their children, so that the children carry on the ancestral inheritance, these higher level principalities, to be empowered to carry forward their plan to bring about their Christ. So that's what they're about. They are dead set in bringing forth the person whom they call as their Christ. And we know from the Bible that this is Antichrist.
And of course, they call him the Christ.
Right. They call him the Christ.
And of course, that would be, of course, the Maitreya of the Buddhists, or the Krishna of the Indian. There certainly would be the Imam Mahdi that the Muslim waits for. The Messiah that that the Jews wait for, the Christ that Americans, I should say, Jesus Christ, we wait for. We certainly don't look for the Christ. And when you ever see that phrase, the Christ, you want to be very, very wary, because they're talking about something entirely different than the Jesus Christ that we worship. We'll be right back with our special guest this evening. Well, this is Dr. Stan here, and of course, Doug, how do you go about approaching people who do have these dissociative personalities, the so-called split personalities that were popularized perhaps 20 or 30 years ago? How do you, as dealing with these people, how do you begin to bring them, out of this morass that they're involved in psychologically?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there are psychological components to this, but it's also important to understand something of the spiritual level and how things are layered on a spiritual level as well. Some well-meaning deliverance ministries will try to cast out an entity, which is really a part of the person's humanity, and do a lot of damage because they don't know what they're dealing with. But I started out in the mid-'80s by just doing biblical counseling, like Dr. Neil Anderson and C. Fred Dickinson and these just biblical counseling. But I noticed there were some people that were not actually being resolved, and when I read Jim Friesen's book, Uncovering the Mystery of MPD in 1991, and shared that with some of the people that I was stuck with, they began to present in little child parts. And I said, well, how come I haven't met you before? And they just looked at me and says, because we didn't think you would believe us. And so once gained the trust and began to move in that area, we began to, and as I would become more educated and going to special seminars and postgraduate seminars that, most of the people go to that are already graduated in this field, I just availed myself to every possible way to educate myself, and of course, staying in the Word as much as you can in this field, in terms of understanding the spiritual nature. You learn from working with these people, Dr. Stan. God just leads you step by step. There's a difference between alternate personalities and getting down to the actual core identity, the true birth person. And so what I do is if I'm working with people in the beginning, I just have a series of questions I ask them if they come for help that help me determine how things are structured, to see how the defenses are set up internally, and then we begin to go to work and to bring forth those human parts that were structured to do various kinds of functions, and decontaminate the system of its demonic attachments, and try to identify those deeper level principalities that are invested of staying hidden and keeping that person as their slave and as a vessel to channel darkness into churches.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and of course our guest this evening is Pastor Doug Riggs, and we're talking about his work with people who have dissociative personalities or multiple personalities or split personalities. They're all the same thing. There are people who, as a child, would have certainly abuse, terrible abuse, and the only way that the child could deal with that was simply to split their personality so that they would have one personality that would have this terrible trauma, and the other one, of course, was the personality they would live with. So before we go on, Doug, would you like to get your webpage out or information in case people would like to get in touch with you?
I don't have a webpage, but what I could do is, if they have any questions, I don't know if we would establish something through your ministry, if they want to get in touch. I could talk with you after that and see.
All right, fine. So if there are people out there who need to get in touch with Pastor Doug Riggs, why, of course, you can contact me and we'll work something out there, because Pastor Riggs, of course, works on this, and of course, this is his calling. The trouble is there are so many people in our society that have these problems, and then they wonder why, sometimes they're just things go so terribly for them. Are there some people there who don't even realize they have this is a problem?
Oh, Dr. Stan, I've been doing this, actually working with multiple since 1991, and the thousands of hours of seeing people go into areas of their life where the trauma has been, you cannot even describe the abreactions. That is, when they get in touch with these areas of torture and trauma and demonization, they're in anguish. They're on the floor. I mean, they can be screaming sometimes, and when you see the reality of this and God's healing, He's the source of this, but it's a process. There is no quick fix. And I think for Christians, that's a problem because, why doesn't Jesus just snap his fingers and bring healing and wholeness? I mean, when you look in the New Testament, He cast out a legion, and I've said in conferences, I said, I wished I had a person who only had a legion, Dr. Stan, because that would be rather simple, because whatever was happening in our Lord's time, it is far worse now. I mean, what the enemy has done now, and I think since the technocrats of Nazi Germany, goes way off the scale of a legion. I mean, these people can be so highly structured and demonized. So as we work with them and bring them more and more out of their past into the present and bring in healing and integration through our Lord Jesus Christ, they're amazing people. I mean, these are my heroes as far as if I use that lightly. Jesus is the only hero, but in terms of those whom I esteem, because they've had the courage to face their past and to come out of this darkness to reveal the secrets with great cost and often abductions. And when you begin to work in this area, the demonic realm lets their handlers know, and they come after you. And they seek to reprogram and abuse, and they hunt you down. And I've been threatened many times. And
are you talking about physically threatened?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's been. I mean, if it wasn't for the Lord, I'd been gone a long time ago. Because when you go in and invade the enemy's kingdom and uncover those kinds of secrets, that creates a tremendous threat. And so I know that I'm here by the grace of God, and Psalm 91 is not just a psalm in the Bible. It is a reality. And many of the other psalms that describe God's protection and His care for His servants.
Well, as hard as it is for a lot of people to believe this sort of thing, there's so much evidence out there from many sources that we have come in contact with that I'm sure this is absolutely true. Now, are all of these demonically inspired? In other words, is there a spiritual element to all of the cases of dissociative personalities, or are some of them just a byproduct of parents who really were cruel and wanted to hurt their children?
Well, you have various levels of DID or multiple personality disorder. If it's a child that grows up in a dysfunctional family or an abusive family, they may split, and their internal dissociative system will be somewhat random. But when you have children born into cult families, and in the case where I've been working primarily with members of the royal family and descendants of the royal family, the abuse is carefully structured. There are specific rituals and types of torture done, which I won't mention on the phone, that are done so that at the time of the trauma and the resultant splitting, demons are conjured in. They are actually forced to call them in, and powers are brought into the person while they're being abused. That's why it's called trauma-based mind control. But it's during the trauma and the torture that is carefully structured. And it's the Nazi doctors have perfected this, and it's been passed on to a number of different people who are working in this area in the occult. And so it is Satan's way to infiltrate and to occupy and attach himself to a person. Now, I'm talking about believers. Now, that person's spirit that is joined to the Lord, they are saved, and that cannot be touched. But if they're believers, they can't be possessed. But in these fragmented areas of their soul, there can be these demonic attachments. They are attached. They are demonized, and there's a difference. I do not believe a Christian can be demon-possessed, but they can certainly be demonized. Now, everyone that I know of, that I've ever worked with, that is MPD, or as we call it now, DID, they have all had a tremendous contamination of the powers of darkness and infiltration in terms of attachments.
All right, so this is why I think that it's very, very difficult to approach this purely from a psychological point of view, and I really believe that there is a tremendous spiritual element to all of this, which is why, if you were to have a counselor, you have to be sure they're a Christian counselor, because you start dabbling in this, and you're going to get under tremendous demonic attack, because they don't want to lose the victim, and they certainly want to attack the person who is trying to drive these demonic beings, these demonic spirits away. Our telephone number, do you want to take any calls?
That's up to you. I mean, if that's what you do, that's fine.
We'll just see if anybody out there has a question or comment. Our telephone number is 1-888-24-LIBERTY, 1-888-24-LIBERTY, or 464-8295 if you have a question or comment on this subject, because it is a very important subject, especially today, because I believe we're going to be moving into very difficult spiritual times. And I think the dominant forces working within our society today are not political or ideological, they're spiritual.
Yeah.
And until people understand that, why, of course, they're going to be totally incapable of taking a stand. And you take a stand without understanding the spiritual aspect of it, you'll be destroyed. And I've been at this for 46 years, and believe me, I've seen so many good people who really wanted to do something to make a better America and make a better world. And they've lost their family, they've lost everything, because, of course, they did not have the Lord's protection. And without the Lord's protection, you don't dare undertake what we undertake.
That's correct.
Well, basically, Doug, you're finding more and more of this today. Certainly, are there other people doing it? Because, at one time, there were a lot of people who were involved, and apparently, when the government, the CIA, the FBI, and the forces of darkness launched a counterattack, why an awful lot of people just dropped out.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, I have a friend in Florida, Dr. Bailey. He said that many have just burned out, and just through the assaults and the impact of all this have dropped out. So there's fewer and fewer that are working this.
Are there any really good books at all on this?
There are so many different ways you can look at it. I know you're going to be talking to Russ on Monday, and he can talk with you about various ways in which this is done, and I could recommend many. But for me, for what I'm doing now at the level that I'm doing, to try to explain the spiritual dynamics, you would have to set in with a session with someone and actually see it happen, because you have to see it, and it's quite incredible. But I'm sure there are some books out there that can give you kind of a basic overview of what you're dealing with. But, to learn this, Dr. Stan, it has to be hands-on, and it takes time. And the church really doesn't want to deal with it. I mean, they just want to say, well, this can't be, or they want to go into denial that this kind of level of evil is even there. Or if God's sovereign, we just trust in the sovereignty of God. Well, I do too, or I wouldn't be here. But you have to deal with reality. And if the enemy is bigger than what you thought, and if you go into this area of work, he will be a lot bigger than you ever imagined. And that just means that our God box has to grow.
Amen to that. Well, let's go to Sarah, who's calling from Spokane, Washington. Hi, Sarah. Do you have a question or comment?
Hi. I've tried to find help through different ways. I've always had a difficult time going to the church or any kind of what the world offers for their psychology type of help. And but I didn't hear your whole program. But while I was listening, I started to get. I feel real strange right now. I started to get really nauseous, and
have you had psychiatric problems? What sort of problems do you have, Sarah?
Well, I have problems of not being able to remember very much from when I was a young child. But I've had people tell me that they think I change a lot.
All right, fine. Do you have any? Let me talk to our guest here, Pastor Doug Riggs. Do you have any thoughts at all,
yes,
Doug?
Sarah, you do. I've I'm familiar with these kinds of symptoms and lack of childhood memory, and maybe the nausea could be something that you need to have somebody help you facilitate seeing what that's about. But you might check with Elijah House in your area. I think that may be in Sandpoint, Idaho. You just go online and look up Elijah House, and just ask the Lord about a good counselor that could help you. I think there may be Sandra Skinner Young that's in that area. She would be very good, and she would help you understand what's going on. But I do think that you need to get from what you just shared, and I don't want to ask questions because it could draw you out into some areas. But from the little bit you shared, I think it would be good to check with Elijah House and just.
They're all Christians.
Yes, they are.
Okay, Sarah, will you do that and then give us a call back afterwards? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Okay, I will.
Thanks so much.
And I'll pray for you, Sarah, and thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Let's go to Mike, who's calling from Santa Cruz. Hi, Mike. Do you have a question or comment?
A question. I hope it's not too far afield. We were subjected nationally to trauma-based programming September 11th, 2001. The trauma being the planes hitting the towers and all the death and the events of those days.
Well, of course, the buildings coming down, one thing to see the planes hitting the buildings, but then, of course, to see the buildings coming down and realizing, of course, that thousands of people died. So it really was a traumatic episode. What was your point, Mike?
Well, let me just finish off the thought. They showed us those planes again and again and again for days and weeks, and but in between showing us the planes and all the death, they told us America has changed forever, and they alternated back and forth between messages that they wanted us to believe and the traumatic scenes. And the third component of this is that the perpetrators of it all emerged as our protectors. They said, okay, we're going to protect you from these horrible people. So I wondered if your guest has thought about any of that and what he might have to say.
Of course, one of the things I would just comment on, of course, we were told that this was the Arabs, and they actually had these pictures of the little children out in the street celebrating. We don't know what they were celebrating, but they showed those pictures over and over again. Obviously, it is the wicked Arabs who are Muslims who are behind what had happened. But what are your thoughts, Doug, about what Mike was asking? Is this an example of mind control?
I don't necessarily think it was mind control. I think that what it was a national traumatic event, and especially people who were there on the scene would probably have to deal with certain elements of post-traumatic stress as adults. And if you would take that kind of trauma of people there in that situation and have children subjected to that kind of thing and worse over and over and over again in early childhood, that would produce splitting. When you have adults subjected to that, they experience post-traumatic stress disorder, and they have to have, some specialized counseling and ministry to work through that. So I would just say that was a national traumatic event that is an acute thing, and it doesn't represent the kind of chronic trauma that produces multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder.
And this usually has to occur in a child, doesn't it? Doesn't it occur in
Absolutely.
And so this is an entirely different situation, yes. Doug, than Mike, I should say.
Yes.
Entirely different situation than what we experienced on September 11th. That was an example of manipulation. But it was an example. It would not create this problem, at least
it would not.
Yeah, I understand that part.
Okay, well, anything else, Mike, before we let you go?
No, that's enough. Thanks a lot.
God bless. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
of course, this is a subject, of course, which a lot of people don't want to face. I mean, they don't want to believe this sort of thing can really go on today. And yet, unfortunately, it does go on today. And there are really, of course, been a conscious effort to cover this up using the television, the story of the pretender, certainly the idea of the Manchurian candidate. I believe that they really can produce Manchurian candidates, but that's an entirely different picture than this childhood ritual satanic abuse, or at least abuse which leads to these dissociative personalities in adult life. And how often do you find somebody who's an adult who's a victim of this? They had no idea what this was about until you began to probe.
Well, I don't really ever probe. I mean, usually people come for counseling, or in the professional area, they have depression or they have various relational problems, and they go in. And if they have a chronic abuse history in childhood and a dissociative history, and the therapist can identify it, not all of them are able to do this, and if they're able to work with it and have experience, then they can begin to help that person reconnect with their past and actually reclaim these different parts of their lives that are trapped in these traumatic events. And often this entrapment is enhanced demonically. Then they can move through the therapeutic process. But most people, they don't even begin to have memories or breakdown till latter 20s or early 30s. And if they don't get help between 30 and 50, the likelihood that they would begin the process diminishes. So there's that spectrum when the defenses begin to break down and the hidden areas of dissociation trauma begin to come forward. It will usually present in terms of depression in women, often uncontrolled anger in men, and then they need to have the kind of people that can help facilitate and get them through this to get their life in order.
Hold that thought. Well, we've got Barbara on the line here. Barbara, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Do you have a question or comment for our guest?
Actually a comment. The one thing, that young lady, if she can get in touch with the ministry that Pastor Riggs talked about, and we'll get back to you at Radio Liberty, because there is somebody who possibly else could help her as well, whose name I won't mention at this point. But I just want to verify somewhat what Pastor Riggs is talking about, that I was given the privilege of reading the papers that the lady who was actually brought out of this dissociative, all of the syndrome, and by reading how she came out of it, I think I gained a much better understanding of how she was taken into it, and it's an astounding process that takes, that goes on, and I just want to verify that this does happen.
Yes, well, thank you. I think that's
it must be a very, very time-consuming, though, and very difficult for you, Doug, to actually have to work with these things, because it must be emotionally draining. I know when I was training to be a doctor and I had to do psychiatry, I got so frustrated with it. I mean, I knew that was the last thing I wanted to do with my life. I wanted something more meat and potatoes, like being an orthopedic surgeon, like being a carpenter, rather than dealing with these deep emotional problems.
Yes, well, it's a calling, Stan, and these wonderful people that have gone through this and had the courage to come out, they didn't ask for this to happen, and I didn't ask for these people to have these problems. But I chose not to run. I chose not to leave.
Well, I'm glad that you're there to help them. And Barbara, anything else you want to say?
No, just God bless him for taking the time to do this, because it is a very long, arduous process.
Yes, it is.
To do this, and it takes a lot of courage and faith in the Lord to do this as well. And this counselor that is here in the Santa Cruz area, one of the reasons that she does not want to give her name out is because she wants to protect the people that she is helping, and primarily for that reason.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Thanks so much, Barbara.
Thank you so much.
Let's go to Robin, who's calling from Carmel. Hi, Robin. Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, Dr. Stan. Pastor Riggs, I wondered if you've heard of a book called Thanks for the Memories by Bryce Taylor.
Yes, in fact, I had I don't know if we'll have time to read it. I had several quotes I could have read.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan. We have Robin calling from Carmel, and she was asking if Pastor Riggs had ever heard of Bryce Taylor. And go right ahead, Dr. Riggs. You obviously are acquainted with her story.
Yes. Yeah, I've talked with her personally, and her daughter, who I won't mention, but I think she was living in Hawaii at the time, and we had several conversations. In fact, it was Ted Gunderson, who was the former director of FBI in Los Angeles. He had 700 officers under him. I met Ted Gunderson. He worked with her for quite some time, and I have a quote here from her. I don't know if it'll be time to read it, but did you have a reason? Did you want to? Did the caller want to ask something about Bryce or?
No, I just because I had done a little reading in this subject myself, and so I haven't read her book, but I do know about it.
All right, well, thanks so much for calling, Robin. Yes, there are so many people out there, and a few of them have written books, fascinating books, and we carry a book by Kathy O'Brien called The Transformation of America, which is one of the most, horrible books, really, of course. It's an amazing story. But I know Kathy personally, and I'm firmly convinced her story is true.
Oh, yeah, I believe that.
Thanks so very much, Robin. Appreciate it. Well, look, we're out of time, Pastor Riggs, but we'll certainly want to get you on our other programs as well, so I hope I can call you, and we'll get you scheduled. I think it's an important subject, especially now.
All right, thank you.
God bless.
Yeah,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, fine. Well, this is amazing material. We actually carry the book, The Transformation of America. We actually carry a number of books. One of them is called The CIA Doctors. It used to be called Operation Bluebird. It was written by Dr. Colin Ross, and he treats these people, these victims of trauma-based mind control. We have a DVD called A Monarch. And then we have a 4-tape set called The Aquarian Conspiracy. In my interviews with Constance Cumby, a DVD with Constance talking about the emergence. And what's the emergence? That is the planned emergence of this one world leader. And certainly there's nobody who knows more about this than Constance. If you like books, we carry the book, of course, Hostage to the Devil. And it's a book that changed my perspective back in about 1980 when I found this in a bookstore over in Hawaii. And it is the story of 5 exorcisms recorded by Father Malachi Martin, a Jesuit priest. And, of course, all exorcisms were documented by the Catholic Church. It's a book that helped to change my life, my perspective. Hostage to the Devil, we recommend people want to get that. They get it with my 4-tape set of my interviews with Pastor Father Malachi. Only one of them really deals with the occult, but the rest of them deal with contemporary problems within Christianity. And then, of course, we carry the book, The Beautiful Side of Evil by Joanna Michelson. That's The Beautiful Side of Evil. Pastor Doug had actually mentioned that book. And then, of course, we have a CD, the talk that Joanna Michelson gave at our conference on the 26th of October of this year. And so you can get the CD by itself. You can get all the CDs of all of the talks we have. Now they're all available. And then, of course, the book, The Beautiful Side of Evil, or you can get my 2-hour interview with Joanna Michelson and 2 other hours on the occult movement in a 4-tape set called The Supernatural. And then, of course, as far as this idea of trauma-based mind control, we have an interview with Colin Ross, who deals with these problems, and it is in our 4-tape set on Operation Paperclip. The program, which totally, I mean, they never mentioned this, they don't teach in schools, but Operation Paperclip was a CIA operation to bring Nazi war criminals to America, not only to work on the space shuttle, the space program, but also to work on mind control and on creating terrible new diseases, and they did. In fact, we have a great DVD with Dr. Garth Nicholson called Terrible New Diseases, and those diseases are there. And the tragedy is so many people are ill today, and nobody can figure out why. Well, our telephone number, 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. We really are involved in a spiritual battle.